Here's an inside scoop. Morgan Tremaine changed the law when he testified at Johnny Depp's trial. In this video, we'll talk about that and what the new law is, so watch and stay tuned. Hi there, my name is Katherine. I'm a lawyer and I also think differently. Who is Morgan Tremaine? Morgan Tremaine was one of the rebuttal witnesses for Johnny Depp's trial. Remember, rebuttal witnesses are only used or identified once they have testimony that will be used to rebut, meaning to impeach testimony by another witness at a different part of the trial. Something that happened in one of the plaintiff's case in chief would be Johnny Depp's case, or something that happened in Amber Heard's case in chief. Here, he was being called by Johnny Depp as a rebuttal witness against Amber Heard's testimony. That's why Amber Heard did not know that he will be a rebuttal witness, because he did not come up until she testified on something that made it relevant for Morgan Tremaine to testify. We'll talk about what that is. Morgan Tremaine used to work for TMZ. TMZ, in turn, is a news organization that focuses on entertainment and celebrity news. Morgan Tremaine was not just any other employee of TMZ. In fact, he was the field manager at the time that TMZ was receiving tips and also the kitchen cabinet video about Johnny Depp and about Amber Heard's TRO when she filed the TRO against Johnny Depp for allegedly hitting her and creating that infamous bruise on her cheek. But at the time of Johnny Depp's trial, Morgan Tremaine was no longer an employee at TMZ. He left TMZ and had his own business and is still a journalist, but he is no longer affiliated with TMZ. That's a very important distinction to remember here. What did TMZ do once it found out that Morgan Tremaine was going to testify for Johnny Depp? On May 24, 2022, TMZ filed a motion to intervene at Judge Ascarati's court. That motion was based on their argument asserting journalistic privilege. What is journalistic privilege? This is something important for you to know as a layperson as well, just in case you ever talk to a journalist and reveal confidential information to them. Sometimes sources tell journalists that they will provide them information, but only if they do not disclose their identity. Sources sometimes want to be anonymous. They don't want to be known for that source because of fear or physical retaliation, anything else that just prevents them from wanting to be known. And that's the source's right. If they say to the journalist, I don't want to be named, then the journalist respects that and respects the identity of the source and promises not to disclose it. If at some point the journalist then publishes that information and then the journalist is compelled to reveal who his or her confidential source is, that journalist can assert journalistic privilege. Journalistic privilege is based on the fundamentals of the First Amendment. It's the fundamental freedom of press here in the United States. It protects the source and the journalist from influence by outside people in terms of providing the truth and accurate information. Because think about it, if a journalist is compelled to write something that's not true because of fear or because of retaliation or because of their safety issues, then the truth in the press will be suppressed. That's why journalistic privilege encourages sources to reveal their information to the press, and journalistic privilege encourages journalists to gather information from their sources. That's because the source and the journalists are protected by journalistic privilege in that they cannot be compelled to reveal who the source is. There's a famous case that TMZ cited in their motion to intervene. Also, Judges Karate cited this same court opinion, and that is Brown versus Commonwealth. It was a 1974 decision of the Virginia Supreme Court. In Brown versus Commonwealth, the Virginia Supreme Court held, meaning that this is the law or interpretation that they have, the Virginia Supreme Court held that the journalistic privilege is a First Amendment privilege. It is not a right. That's very important. Why? Because since the journalistic privilege is a privilege and not a right, that means that it is not absolute, it is not universal, and it does not trump all of the other rights that a person might have. For example, due process is a right. So if due process compared to journalistic privilege, if you weigh which one is more important, then the due process right of a person will always outweigh a journalistic privilege. That means that if a due process right of a person is at issue or in jeopardy, then the journalistic privilege will no longer apply and the journalist must reveal the source. That's what happened in Brown versus Commonwealth. The judges were trying to balance whether or not the due process right of the criminal defendant to find out the source of the information that the journalist has outweighs the journalistic privilege. In that case of Brown versus Commonwealth, the justices held that it does not outweigh the due process right of the criminal defendant because the naming of the source of that journalist was not material to the case. Because that Virginia Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus Commonwealth affirmed what the lower court or the trial court found, wherein the journalist was not compelled to reveal her source, that's why TMZ was relying on that ruling. And that's why also Judge Ascarati mentioned it in her ruling as to why and what journalistic privilege was. As you know, Judge Ascarati denied TMC's motion to intervene, allowing Morgan Tremaine to testify as a rebuttal witness. We'll go back to what Judge Ascarati's ruling is later on in this video. But first, let's go ahead and watch certain portions of Morgan Tremaine's testimony. First, Morgan Tremaine talks about how tips are received and verified by TMZ. That's important to establish because the tips come from the sources, the confidential sources. So let's go ahead and take a listen what he said about that.
And how were those tips received?
They were received either through tips that we received through our tip line or directly through news producers in the office.
And were tips frequently received directly from sources?
Very often the case, yeah.
And who were the type of sources that TMZ received tips from?
They would receive tips from, oftentimes it would be publicists, managers, agents, or B-list celebrities.
Lawyers?
And lawyers, definitely.
How are tips verified?
Tips are verified by an extensive process. If they come in through our tip line, we have to verify who sent it, that the source is truthful, and so they have to add their contact information, which is a field in that on that website for like name, phone number, things like that.
And how long did that process typically take?
If we receive a tip through the tip line, it could take a while because that would need to be, if it was a tip, we would need to verify it. If it was media, such as photos or videos, that would need to be extensively verified to ensure that the person sending it is the copyright holder and that we would have the legal ability to air it and distribute it.
Now that Morgan Tremaine established how TMZ in general receives tips and what do they do with it, now Camille Vasquez has to establish how does Morgan Tremaine know how all of this works. That's why we need to find out what was his involvement at that time. Here is what he testified to.
And what was your role in that assignment?
For that, Ms. Heard was filing a restraining order at a courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. So I dispatched camera people to that location.
Under what circumstances would you normally send paparazzi to a courthouse?
Only if we had been informed prior. It's not by any means a celebrity hotspot. We would only ever send people there if we had been tipped off that something was occurring and there was somebody present there.
And what footage was TMZ trying to capture at the LA courthouse on May 27th, 2016?
We were trying to capture Amber leaving the courthouse and an alleged bruise on the right side of her face.
What was your team of paparazzi supposed to do while they were at the LA courthouse on May 27th, 2016?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay and foundation.
What were they supposed to do?
Right. She's asking for, I don't think there's a foundational hearsay.
I'll overrule the objection at this point. We'll see.
Go ahead, Mr. Tremaine.
Can you state the question again?
What was your team of paparazzi supposed to do while they were at the Los Angeles courthouse on May 27th, 2016?
Their objective was to capture her leaving the courthouse, and then she was going to sort of stop and turn towards the camera to display the bruise on the right side of her face, the alleged bruise.
Did your team of videographers get the shot of Amber Heard?
We did.
The first two clips that you heard, those are testimonies about foundational evidence. You've probably heard some of the lawyers in this trial or other trials say objection, lack of foundation. What that means is the lawyer who's asking the question and the witnesses answering have not yet established as to how that witness found out about that information. That's why once Camille asked Morgan as to how TMC's process worked in receiving tips, and also Morgan testified how he has personal knowledge of that information, those are key to establish first. Now that we have those foundations laid, Camille then asked how Morgan actually received the video at issue, which is the video of the kitchen cabinet where Johnny Depp was smashing and was mad.
Can you describe to the jury how you received the video on August 12, 2016?
Yes, the video was sent in through our email tip line, which is an email distribution that goes to all the producers and to myself as the field assignment manager, because it often included celebrity locations. It came in as I recall,
Objection, hearsay.
He's just describing how it came in.
I think he's about to reveal hearsay, Your Honor.
I'll overrule for now. We'll see where it goes. Okay.
Please continue.
So I received that email, and it included a link from some unknown Dropbox type public website in which it contained that video.
Your Honor, hearsay. He's about to describe what comes from the Dropbox website, and that's...
So far, he's just said was a link from the Dropbox. We'll see the next question. Go ahead, next question.
So you received a link. What was in that link?
In that link was the video of Johnny Depp smashing the cabinets.
Okay. And you received this video in your inbox, correct?
I did.
Okay. What did you do once you received that video?
We downloaded it. We alerted the web editor who was sitting next to me at the time. We downloaded it, and then were instructed by the news producer to do what we call slap bumpers and a bug on it, which is putting the dun 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 at the beginning end, and then putting a translucent watermark over it, which indicates copyright ownership.
Okay. After you did that, was it posted?
It was posted, yes.
Where was it posted?
It was posted to tmz.com.
In this next clip, we'll show Morgan Tremaine explained copyright source and how the process is and the time it takes to prove who the copyright source of a material. That is very important testimony because whoever owns the copyright is the owner of that property. Basically, if I was shooting a video like this, I am the owner of the copyright of this video. And no one else can disseminate or reveal this information to anyone else unless I give give them permission to do so. Here, Morgan Tremaine testifies what the procedure is to do that. On top of that, we'll put it side by side to his testimony as to how TMZ became the copyright owner ultimately of that video and was able to publish it or post it in their website. So let's go ahead and listen.
How long does it take to post a story after media's been received by TMZ?
After media's been received, it could take any length of time depending on who owns the copyright.
How does TMZ obtain copyright over images and videos?
The only way to obtain copyright over media would be if we shot it ourselves, if it was sent to the tip line, source verified that it was from the original copyright owner, and then either purchased from that person or given to us. And then the third option would be if it was directly given to us by the copyright holder, like a direct source.
And how long does it take to copyright something TMZ has received through the tip line?
It can take a while because you have to extensively verify that that person owns the copyright. And then possibly, it depends also if you can even get in contact with the person because they might not be super responsive immediately via phone or email that they provided. And then potentially you'd have to enter a negotiation with our Clips and Clearances department to figure out the cost of that media. Because it was a TMZ exclusive.
And what does that mean?
It means the TMZ owns the copyright to it. So it can't be distributed by any other media source without backlinking to TMZ, and they wouldn't be able to upload that media without getting a copyright strike.
Have you seen the kitchen cabinet video that was played in this trial?
I have, yes.
In this next clip, we'll see how Morgan Tremaine testified as to the difference between the video that TMZ received and also the video that was played at trial of the kitchen cabinet video. I think that's a very important distinction because you want to know what are the edited and the actual video that was shown out there. So let's go ahead and take a look.
How does that video that was played in this trial compare to the one you received on August 12, 2016?
When I had clicked the direct link that we received and watched the video in its entirety, it was much shorter than the video we had received, than the video that's been played in his trial. There was a bit at the beginning that was played here in which Ms. Heard is seemingly sort of setting up the camera and getting into position. And then there's a bit at the end where she's seemingly snickering and looks at the camera. That part was not present in what we received.
Did TMZ edit the video?
No, not even a little. When we receive something and it's edited, there's a clear indicator because there's sort of a journalistic practice that uses when there's an edit, you do what's called like a white flash transition, which covers the entire screen with white to very clearly indicate to everybody there was an edit here for time or whatever, just to make it a little more compelling. But in this case, it was not edited, as I was staring at the machine that edited it and present for the entirety of receipt to publishing.
And that was pretty much the substance of Morgan Tremaine's testimony, identifying the source without actually saying the name Amber Heard. That was genius. And also clarifying the difference between what the TMZ received and what was played at trial. And that was it. Then it was now the time for Amber Heard's legal team to cross-examine him. And Elaine Bredehoff did that, as we all know. At that time too, Amber Heard's legal team was already running out of time. So that means they couldn't ask him a lot of other questions, and you don't really want to do that anyways for a rebuttal witness. The goal is to go in and out, ask the question, and that's done. Here, Elaine chose to ask him about bias questions. Bias questions are very common questions that lawyers ask in cross-examination to show that the witness is not telling the truth because of a bias, whether he or she will get a gain from it, from testifying, or will gain something from one of the parties at the trial, or whether or not they'll get paid. But sometimes you have to be really careful how you ask that and who you ask that from. Here we see that it actually backfired on Elaine. Let's go ahead and take a look at Morgan Tremaine's infamous response to Elaine's bias question.
Okay, you know this case is being televised, right?
I am aware that there are cameras.
And so this gets you your 15 minutes of fame, doesn't
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
it? I can ask that question.
Overruled.
So I stand to gain nothing from this. I'm actually putting myself kind of in a target of TMZ, a very litigious organization, and I'm not seeking any 15 minutes here. Though you're welcome to speculate. I could say the same thing by taking Amber Heard as a client for you.
A little argumentative, don't you think?
Oh, hardly. I find that to be purely logical. Thank you.
Now, after Elaine's cross-examination, then Camille Vasquez had her chance to come up and redirect the examination of Morgan Tremaine. That means to rehabilitate any questions that might have gone bad for their side when Elaine was asking the question. And since Elaine's question was only about bias, Camille's redirect was only about bias. And she asked the perfect question, and Morgan Tremaine had the perfect answer as well, which is, why did you come forward and testify at trial? Let's go ahead and listen to that.
I saw that there was a discrepancy with like the video that was shown here and the video that I know I'd received. So I had no interest in testifying. I had reached out simply to maybe try to help with the timeline of things or help with the case in any way, just by virtue of understanding the timeline of the stories that were published and kind of how that can be unclear. But I had no idea I'd be on the stand.
After Morgan Tremaine testified, he received a lot of requests for interviews, either in the news outlets or podcasts or on social media. He turned that down, but there are 2 interviews that he did that I particularly like. One is the interview by DUI Guy. So let's go ahead and take a look at certain clips about that. Specifically, I was very surprised when he said how he felt about testifying. Let's go ahead and check that one out.
How did it feel?
Testifying?
That moment, yeah.
Oh, that moment didn't feel like anything. I was horrified the entire time. Like my ex-roommate put it perfectly. I saw he left some comment. He said Morgan's an introvert. There's no way he would ever do this if it wasn't for truth. So yeah, I was just absolutely horrified the entire time. I had no idea I had even did like an okay enough job. I just sat down and just felt horrified.
I also like the question about how he prepared for that trial testimony when he's an introvert. You might want to listen to this if you're an introvert yourself and are about to present somewhere in public or have a public speaking engagement. And let's go ahead and take a listen what he said.
As an introvert, how did you prepare for such public exposure?
Call my prescriber and get a Xanax prescription in case I have a panic attack. That's what you do. I mean, it's like I've been on, like I've done TV, and I've been like a red carpet reporter, and I produced and directed like a show and stuff. I've done all sorts of stuff.
So you have some experience.
It's always nerve-wracking, but it's like one of those things you have to push through because you have to do it. You just have to do it. So I had to just sit there and in my head try to figure out how in my body I could physically do this. So it was a lot. It was a lot, but yeah, it was like mentally prepping yourself. Like, I have to do this. How can I do this? How can I actually physically get up there and do this and not make an ass of myself?
Well, you did a great job.
Well, I appreciate that.
I'm always interested as to the backstory of any particular event, specifically how things end up the way they did. Like here, how did Morgan Tremaine contact Johnny Depp's legal team? What happened? Who did he contact? Here, Angenette Levy actually asked him that question when she interviewed Morgan Tremaine. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
What exactly was it in which that prompted you to just call them and say, I need to talk to you?
Well, I had started to see clips on TikTok once TMZ started getting into the mix of things. And I'd seen a couple clips of people talking about like, oh, TMZ is the smoking gun, clearly. There's got to be something that they could say that would pop in on this. And then I slowly started to remember and feel like I was a part of this. I'm like, I kind of remember being there that night when we received the video. I remember in just what my work was at the time, having to be very much a part of sending cameras through. So there have been other times in the media where I feel very much close to certain events that come up or certain stories just by virtue of having worked on them, and a lot of like big celebrity deaths and celebrity scandals and such. But with this one in particular, I remember seeing a TikTok in which someone felt like they had some kind of idea or evidence in some way, and they had recorded themselves sending an email to Camila. And I hadn't even thought of that as a possibility. And so then I started to think, maybe I should just send her an email and just see if I can help in some way, because somebody's definitely lying in this based on my firsthand knowledge of this. So I had just sent an email, and it said, that the subject line was like former TMZ employee. And I even had said, I'm sure you guys are already talking to other TMZ employees as, in just your due diligence of this case. Mm-hmm. And even so far as naming someone who I knew was very, very closely involved in the story at the time. And said, but if there's anything I can do to help, I was there that night when we received this video, and maybe I can help clear some stuff up because it looks like someone's possibly lying. And then I received a phone call about an hour later. And as soon as I saw Camille's number come up on my caller ID, I knew I was in it too deep, and I was probably going to have to testify. And it was too late to go back now.
Yeah, no turning back for sure. So it was Camille's cell or her office number, and it pops up, and okay, it's his lawyers. Yeah,
it had been. I think it was maybe immediately after they had called it for the day, and then she had been checking her email and just called me straight away, and was basically like, "What are you doing next week?"
So it was during Amber Heard's case, I'm assuming, that you contacted her. If she's asking you, what are you doing?
It was about a week before I was up.
We saw a trial where Morgan Tremaine testified as to why he came forward. Angenette Levy asked him a similar question as well. And let's take a listen as to what prompted him to actually contact Johnny Depp's lawyers.
What was it about it that you didn't like, or that prompted you to reach out?
Well, I mean, it wasn't anything emotional. It was just the fact that it was essentially doctored. It was essentially edited for a particular purpose, I believe. And I think that was very clear to perhaps the jury. But yeah, it was edited in a way that made it seem beneficial for one party more than the other. And I think that's fairly obvious. And all I did was state the facts that what we received was an edited portion of what was shown in court. And that's something that really anyone could have noticed at that point, but I just think nobody had. Because if you'd gone back and looked at the TMZ article and the video that was still up, it was shown as such. I think you might look at that and think, oh, maybe TMZ cut off the front and top of it, but my unique perspective was knowing that we did not edit that video.
Of course, we all want to know what he was thinking at that time that Elaine Bredehoff asked him about his alleged 15 minutes of fame. I like his response here when he was asked about that by Angenette Levy, because he addressed two important issues. One, mental health, and two, bullying. Mental health in terms of he was so open about seeing a psychiatrist and needing to talk to a mental health professional because he was so anxious and so nervous about the whole process, which rightfully so. A lot of witnesses feel the same way, but here it's just different for him because he's an introvert and he wants to be able to tell the truth. Second, he talks about bullying and was very open as well in admitting that he has been bullied in the past, where he learned how to deal with bullies, and he felt that Elaine Bredehoff was just another bully, and he figured out a way to respond back to her. Go ahead and take a listen, because I think these are two important issues that are worth talking about, which he did in this interview. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
You had a presence about you, and when you were on cross-examination, you know, there was this suggestion that you just kind of popped up out of nowhere to get your 15 minutes of fame. You know, you just told me you've turned down lots of interview requests and things like that from, you know, news organizations, podcasts, etc. So people, I mean, I think we were all amused by it because you're like, whoa, he really like smacked Elaine down with that. But and Johnny Depp even kind of seemed to snicker a little bit at your testimony or seemed to be amused by it. So what were your thoughts as you watched kind of people say things about you? I'm sure you became a couple of million TikTok videos or what have you. I mean, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I had no idea what was going on at the moment. I was such a ball of stress. I think it wasn't until maybe the next day that I started to realize that, oh, I think people got a kick out of that. But I mean, really, it's just, I mean, I had no idea. When I was up there, all I knew was that they were out of time, Amber's side, so my cross was going to be very short. And I didn't know what they were going to ask. I knew they were going to object the entire time, and I knew that they were going to have a very short cross. I just didn't realize they were going to waste their time on it, because frankly, I could think of maybe 10 things they could have asked me that would have been legitimate, and instead they asked me. They tried to imply that I was in there for fame, which is just. I think anybody who knows me knows I'm not in it for that, and I have a lot of anxiety, and it took a lot for me to do that. It was basically like a full day of trying to psych myself up and talking to my psychiatrist and trying to figure out how I could possibly get through doing this, because I just did not want that kind of attention.
So you were really stressed out about this.
Oh yeah, I cannot explain how much I did not want to do this, but it was like I said, as soon as I saw that name come up on my caller ID, I was like, I am really involved in this, and I think I have a responsibility to speak up now, especially if counsel feels like this is something that they need.
What did you think of the things that Elaine was asking you? I mean, did you feel stressed out at the time when you were on cross? You said you were, a ball of stress up there, or I mean, because you really clapped back at her pretty hard.
Well, I mean, I've said it before, but I mean, it was bullying like anybody else. I've had to deal with that from people in power for a long time, so I'm used to dealing with that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that was the reflex of just having kind of a rational response to it instead of just being bullied. So that's all it was. It was just bullying.
I'd like to point out that Morgan Tremaine actually used his fame from this trial by having fundraisers for charities that were very close to his heart. I want to highlight those charities just in case that you'd want to contribute to them as well. Here's what charities he was supporting or he was promoting after the trial.
And I noticed too, I thought it was really cool that didn't you hold a fundraiser on your Twitch channel?
I did, yeah. When I got a lot of attention, I noticed a lot of social media coming at that. So I thought, oh, you know what? I don't really want to. I think I've frustrated a lot of friends of mine who work in the media who have said, oh, you got to strike while the iron's hot and try to get like a show or do something. And not everyone wants to be the next Ryan Seacrest, and I frankly don't want to. So I just try to use it for charity. I'm friends with people who own a couple charities and just tried to use that for good in any way I can.
I think that's really nice. Do you want to name those charities that you held those fundraisers for?
Sure. So I work in the video game industry, and I work really closely with this one called Stack Up, which uses video games to combat veteran suicide and promote positive mental health in active military. So what they do is they send care packages of video games and consoles to veterans that are struggling, and then also to active military to keep them occupied while they're deployed.
Now that we've heard Morgan Tremaine's testimony, let's talk about how did Morgan Tremaine change the law when he testified at Johnny Depp's trial. As I mentioned earlier, Judge Ascarati denied TMZ's motion to intervene. When she did that, she also stated on the record as to the basis of her denial. When she did that, she actually created new law for Virginia regarding journalistic privilege and motion to intervene. Also, her law can now be used by other states as persuasive authority. How does that work? There's an important legal term that you need to know. That is precedent. Precedent refers to a court decision that becomes binding or becomes an authority for later cases that has similar facts or similar law. Precedents require the court to apply the same law in other cases with the same set of facts. That way, individuals such as you and me will be assured that the law will be applied the same way and not based on a judge's personal point of view. Since Judge Ascarati's order and the basis for her ruling is now a precedent in Virginia courts, it actually becomes a binding authority where it will be cited by other people if they have a similar circumstance. Now, for the other states that are basically not Virginia, let's say in California or Florida, if a similar situation arises, then it's called persuasive authority. authority, which means that other courts or other parties can use the logic, the law, the basis of Judge Escarati's ruling to their circumstance. It says, hey, it's very similar. I think we can follow what Judge Escarati did or said here in my situation. That's how precedent works. It can be binding authority or persuasive authority as well. So let's go ahead and take a listen now to what Judge Escarati's ruling is, because that's very important. The words, the specific words that judges use for their ruling are very critical. They choose words very carefully. That's why Judge Escarati was actually reading her opinion, because each word is very important. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what her ruling is and what the bases are, and I'll tell you what the new law came out of that ruling.
All right, in this matter, under Virginia Rule Supreme Court 3:14, a new party may intervene as a plaintiff or defendant to assert any claim or defense germane to the subject matter of the proceeding. A new party may not intervene unless they assert some right involved in the underlying litigation. A party is not entitled to intervene merely because a byproduct of the litigation adversely impacts them, and the decision to allow intervention is within the broad discretion of the trial court. Here, the rights asserted are not germane to the trial. The central issues in this case are whether defendant defamed plaintiff and whether plaintiff defamed defendant through a theory of vicarious liability. The issue of the confidentiality of sources has not come up as in other cases cited by EHM, which is the corporation that TMZ belongs to, is under their umbrella. In Brown versus the Commonwealth, there was an attempt by the criminal defendant to subpoena institutions in order to obtain the name of the confidential source. When the author of the article was subpoenaed, she refused to identify her confidential source on the stand. And in this case, it appears that the witness is willing to state the name of the confidential source without being compelled voluntarily. Whether that breaches a non-disclosure agreement between Mr. Tremaine and EHM is not germane to this matter and can be litigated in a separate matter if EHM so chooses. And while breaches of contract must be taken seriously, and the court does, any alleged breach is not germane to the underlying litigation here. That contractual action has no bearing on this case and is thus not germane to this litigation. Therefore, I'll deny the non-party EHM Productions motion to intervene.
Based on what Judge Escarati just said, there are two laws, I would argue, that came out of that ruling. The first one is a motion to intervene is not the proper legal vehicle for a new party to assert itself to a trial when the issue is not germane to the trial. For example, TMZ cannot use a motion to intervene here in this case where the issue is defamation and not whether confidential source or journalistic privilege is at issue. What that means is if in Virginia or in any other states that same issue comes about where a new party is trying to insert itself in another case, then that court will have to figure out if the new party is trying to insert itself germane to the issues at trial. If it's not, then motion to intervene is not the proper legal vehicle for them. Now, here's the big law that Morgan Tremaine changed regarding journalistic privilege when he's testified at Johnny Depp's trial. When the journalist is willing to reveal the confidential source voluntarily without being compelled, such as a subpoena or any other court vehicle compelling the journalist to reveal the source, then that journalist can testify at trial. What does this mean? This means that if a journalist or a former employee of a news organization wants to voluntarily reveal their source at trial, they can do so and they can waive their journalistic privilege themselves. Journalistic privilege in itself is held by the journalist, that they could go ahead and waive that if they want to. It's not really owned by the source, it's owned by the journalist. But it becomes a bigger issue when the journalist is now a former employee of a news organization. How can the news organization prevent a journalist who used to be their employee from revealing the source that seems to belong to both the news organization and also the journalist himself? Here, Judge Escarati's ruling said that the news organization's recourse would be to pursue a former employee, Morgan Tremaine, through breach of contract. That's because most employees in this situation may or may not have a non-disclosure agreement. If they did have a non-disclosure agreement and Morgan Tremaine broke that agreement by testifying here, then that's what TMZ's avenue is. However, since Morgan Tremaine already testified and waived the journalistic privilege, then it almost doesn't make sense for TMZ to pursue Morgan Tremaine for breach of non-disclosure agreement, because the purpose of them doing that is to prevent him from testifying something that he already did. I don't think TMZ will go after Morgan Tremaine here because, one, it would be bad press for them because Morgan Tremaine garnered a lot of supporters for testifying about the truth. If TMZ goes after him, TMZ will incur a lot of wrath from those supporters. Also, as I mentioned, it's not a good idea for TMZ to go after Morgan Tremaine based on breach of contract because Morgan Tremaine already testified, and if TMZ wants to promote or preserve journalistic privilege, it's already waived by Morgan Tremaine when he testified, so it's a moot point. Now you know what the new law that Morgan Tremaine created because he testified, and I'll repeat it, and that is when a journalist is willing to reveal the name of the source voluntarily without being compelled, and that journalist is a former employee of a news organization, then that journalist can testify at trial. Lastly, I want to let you know that the links to the interviews and the trials that I mentioned in this video are in the description below, so you can go ahead and listen to that entire clip because we only highlighted certain portion of those. I am a firm believer of supporting other LawTubers, other YouTubers, and other channels as well, so that's why I linked them below so you can go ahead and support and subscribe to them as well. If you learned something new from our video, please go ahead and click subscribe. Also, let us know in the comments below if you have any other questions that we can answer for you. We love answering your questions and we love answering your comments. Bye. Have a great day.